Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're jumping right into what I'd honestly think is the beating heart of Jane Austen's most ambitious and definitely her most controversial novel, Mansfield Park. Specifically, we're going to focus on its protagonist, Fanny Price. Now, she's a character who has fiercely divided readers for over 2 centuries. But by the end of our time together today, you just might see her as the most resilient survivor in all of classic literature.
Okay, let's dive into this, because to truly understand Fanny, we kind of have to address the elephant in the room. A vast number of readers straight up dislike Fanny Price. I mean, compared to Austen's other beloved heroines, Fanny gets constantly labeled as priggish, passive, and just plain boring. Hollywood literally doesn't know what to do with her. The 1999 film turned her into this fiery, outspoken proto-feminist, and the 2007 TV adaptation tried to make her way more glamorous and lively. They fundamentally change her personality, mostly because modern audiences supposedly demand this loud, sparkling heroine.
But here's the thing. This controversy isn't just a modern phenomenon. You know you've got a tough crowd when your own mother turns on your protagonist. Jane Austen actually collected readers' opinions in this little booklet she kept, and her own mother severely disliked Fanny's quiet demeanor, famously describing the character as simply insipid. Yeah, ouch.
So, why on earth did Jane Austen, who is literally the absolute master of the sparkling, witty heroine, why did she write a lead character who is so deeply introverted and, well, seemingly passive? Throughout this explainer, we're going to completely reevaluate Fanny Price. We're going to reframe this perceived weakness and discover how her quiet nature is actually a profound form of resistance and survival.
And this brilliantly illustrates why Fanny is so incredibly different. When we look at her alongside Elizabeth Bennet or Emma Woodhouse, right, those women are highly confident, they're socially adept, but they possess something absolutely critical that Fanny lacks: massive class privilege and wealth. Emma has 30,000 pounds. Fanny, on the other hand, is a displaced child. She's poor, she's entirely dependent on the charity of her relatives, and she suffers from really poor physical health. She simply doesn't have the social safety net required to act with that lively, rebellious sparkle. For Fanny, making a mistake isn't just some quirky plot point. It literally means potential ruin.
In fact, to truly grasp Fanny's timidity, we kind of have to look at her through a modern psychological lens. As literary critic Joan Klingle-Dray suggests, Fanny is essentially a classic study in battered child syndrome. She is the victim of intense emotional and material abuse, first in her original home in Portsmouth, and then again in her new wealthy home. So her silence, her physical shrinking, and her submissiveness, they aren't character flaws, they are highly developed coping mechanisms.
Just consider the toxic environment she's forced to endure every single day. She basically trades one dysfunctional family for another. You've got Aunt Norris, a deeply narcissistic, scheming woman who constantly verbally abuses Fanny and treats her like a second-class citizen. Then there's Lady Bertram, who is entirely emotionally absent and lazy, treating everyone around her like personal servants. And Sir Thomas Bertram, the patriarch, he's a sexist, authoritative enabler who allows this blatant abuse to happen right under his roof. For Fanny, compliance was her only viable option to avoid being thrown out into homelessness and starvation. It was literally accept the abuse or starve.
But Fanny's whole survival strategy is severely challenged when the sophisticated, worldly Crawford siblings, Henry and Mary, arrive from London. Their arrival kicks off this intensely dramatic theatricals episode where the young adults decide they're going to stage a scandalous play called Lover's Vows. And this becomes the very first major test of Fanny's moral compass.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because watch how quickly things escalate over just a few days. Thomas Bertram proposes this risque play, which, by the way, was a loose translation of a highly controversial German drama. And almost immediately, these rehearsals just become a convenient excuse for the young adults to escape adult supervision. By day 7, the charismatic Henry Crawford and Fanny's cousin Maria Bertram, who is engaged to be married to someone else, mind you, are using the play to blatantly, emotionally, and physically cheat. And here is where Fanny's hidden moral strength shines the brightest. She is the only person in the entire household wise enough to see this moral rot for exactly what it is. Despite intense peer pressure, and despite her own genuine love of literature and theater, she stands absolutely firm. She flat out refuses to participate in the play. In this moment, her silence transforms from a trauma response into an active refusal to compromise her morals.
Which brings us to the climax of the narrative, where Fanny's quiet strength is put to the absolute ultimate test,
We're talking about the marriage market, which, in Austen's world, is almost entirely a mercenary financial transaction. Henry Crawford, who is suddenly amused by Fanny, decides he wants to marry her. Sir Thomas is absolutely thrilled by this incredibly advantageous match and demands that she accept. The stakes for Fanny have literally never been higher.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is seeing exactly what Austen was doing with Henry Crawford here. Readers often hope Fanny will reform him, right? Kind of like how Elizabeth Bennet reformed Mr. Darcy. But notice the fundamental difference here. Darcy was flawed, for sure, but he had deep principles and actively worked to change his behavior. Henry Crawford is fundamentally weak-willed. He literally just played with a married woman because his ego required constant validation. Austen is showing us the absolute limits of the reformed rake trope. Fanny sees right through him. She knows for a fact he is incapable of long-term reform.
And so she delivers this line, "Oh, no, sir, I cannot. Indeed, I cannot go down to him." This is an unprecedented, earth-shattering no to the patriarch, Sir Thomas. Think about the immense willpower this required. A poor, dependent, physically frail young woman standing up to the terrifying verbal abuse of her uncle, risking her entire livelihood, and rejecting a massively wealthy marriage, all purely on moral grounds. It is just a stunning display of backbone.
But we have to remember that Fanny's morality operates in a deeply corrupt system, which brings us to the dark underbelly of Mansfield Park. Sir Thomas's wealth, the very money that funds this beautiful estate, comes from a slave plantation he owns in Antigua. The elegance they all enjoy is built directly on colonial brutality. In a pivotal moment, Fanny actually questions her uncle about the slave trade, and her question is met only by a dead silence from the family. This socio-political subtext aligns Fanny strongly with the evangelical and abolitionist principles of the era. It showcases a quiet but firm resistance to the imperialist mindset that funds her very existence.
This realization is exactly why we have to view Fanny's character through a completely different lens. Her rebellion is quiet, yeah, but it is absolute. She represents substance over flash, maintaining this incredible inward order against immense worldly and corrupt pressures.
And this substance is perfectly contrasted by Mary Crawford. Mary is the character modern readers initially gravitate toward. You know, she's witty, she's charming, she has those bright London manners. But Mary's wit is fake, and honestly, it's pretty shallow. She has immense moral flexibility, famously laughing off her brother's affairs and plotting to secure wealth at basically any cost. Fanny, conversely, has steady substance. She has deep integrity and an unshakable conscience. Mary can be bought, Fanny absolutely cannot be manipulated.
So the crucial point is really captured by literary critic Harold Bloom. He describes her power as the will to be herself. It is precisely her lack of a will to dominate others that allows her moral rectitude to triumph in the end. She doesn't need to control anyone else, she simply refuses to let anyone else control her soul.
Which leaves us with this final thought. In a world that constantly tells us we have to be loud, outgoing, and aggressive to be strong, Fanny Price offers a totally different masterclass in resilience. Is true strength always loud? Or can the most revolutionary act, especially when you have no power, no money, and no voice, simply be looking a corrupt world in the eye and refusing to compromise your soul? Take that question with you today, and the next time you think of Jane Austen's most boring heroine, remember the quiet, unshakable survivor of Mansfield Park. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.